Hey, my name is Mike Haynie, and welcome to another episode of 60 Minutes in Black America. Today's show, I promise, will be one that you won't forget. We're speaking with our former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland, the Honorable Boyd Rutherford, as well as a cryptocurrency update and how that fits into today's economy as we continue to educate you in that direction. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back. Good evening again, and thank you so much for watching 60 Minutes in Black America. If you're watching us on any of the Facebook pages, please like our Facebook page and subscribe if you're watching us on YouTube. We're also out there on LinkedIn. Matter of fact, last week, many of you viewed us on our LinkedIn page as well. I'd also like to thank each of you that watched our show last week when we had the cannabis councilman, a politician out of the state of Maryland who is a strong advocate of the cannabis as a business. And he also has advocated, particularly for its medical use, updating us now that in the state of Maryland, they've passed legislation for its recreational use. You can always go back on our YouTube page and watch any of our previous shows. But today, I'm very excited to have someone that I call a friend over the course of the past few years since I met him. And I remember exactly how I met him. A friend of mine said, "Hey, I want you to meet this guy that is running for lieutenant governor, running on the ticket for lieutenant governor for the state of Maryland on the Republican Party." And me, as a lifetime Democrat, and I usually don't discuss my politics and what I do because this isn't the show for that. I said, okay. And so about 9:30 in the morning, and as I said, I remember precisely where I met him at a coffee shop just off of the outskirts of downtown, around the corner from the Babe Ruth Museum here in Baltimore. We sat and I listened to the Honorable Boyd Rutherford talk about why he was running on the ticket for governor as the lieutenant governor. And one thing that I always said that I hope that I always have, and that is an open mind, an open mind to other things, hearing other people's perspective, the other side of the coin, whether I agree with it or not, that the only way that I could be a better person is to hear what someone else had to say. And I got to tell you, it was a game changer for me. Just first of all, seeing someone of the Republican Party that looked like me, that I had a chance to interact with, and a chance to talk with, speak to. And I got to tell you, what we engaged each other in terms of our conversation was not very far off. And I got to tell you, for the first time in my lifetime, I supported this lieutenant governor and that ticket at that time, not knowing whether they'd win, because as many of you understand Maryland, Maryland is considered a blue state, a deep, deep blue state. But lo and behold, they pulled it off. So we have on the show today the Honorable Boyd Rutherford. I described as an American politician. In addition to that, a very, very good human being. So I'd like to bring the former lieutenant governor, and I'm going to slip up sometimes and call him former governor, lieutenant governor, whatever, but I think you guys will get the gist of what I'm saying of this great man. Mr. Rutherford.
Good afternoon.
How you doing today?
I'm doing well, doing very well. Thanks for
Great,
having me.
great. No, thank you so much for being on. And I got to tell you, and we'll talk about it later, I thoroughly enjoyed your book signing on Friday, which was the impetus for your appearance and me pushing some people off of the show so that I can get you on this show and really talk about that book that you wrote as you tracked across the state into various state parks, but we'll get into that later. But just a bit about you, Lieutenant Governor, in terms of how you got into politics and, how you chose the party you're in and school and all that good stuff about yourself.
Yeah. Well, I was born and reared in Washington, D.C., and I was once told that you raise chickens, you rear children. So I was reared in D.C., went to school there. I went to Howard University as an undergrad, um, worked in New York for a period of time, worked in Los Angeles. And while out there, I decided to go to law school and graduate school and did that at University of Southern California. Practiced law in LA for a while, came back east and practiced in DC and in Baltimore. You asked about the political background. I think when I first registered to vote, I think I registered either as an independent or a DC statehood party, one of the two. I don't remember, but I did realize very quickly that everything is done in the Democratic primary in DC, just like if you're in Baltimore City, the action is really in the Democratic primary. So I changed and became a Democrat in terms of registration. And for many years was registered as a Democrat, and I just started to feel that in terms of my views, in terms of being pro-business, economic empowerment, I always felt and still feel the way that you move the Black community forward is through economic development, and economic development meaning enterprise, entrepreneurial business development, businesses that are providing wealth to the families, but also are employing people in the community and growing the community that way. And that it seemed as though particularly at the time, the Republican Party was speaking more to that than the Democratic Party. And the Democrats, for me, we're treating Black folks as victims, and I don't view myself as a victim. I mean,
Wow.
I've been a victim of crime, like a lot of people. I've had my car broken into and things of that nature. My apartment broken into years ago, but I don't see myself as a social victim. And I don't live my life that way. And so I decided to give the party a try, and have been happy in the party. Now, the direction the party has gone recently has disappointed me. I view, and I know you didn't want to get into the political discussion, but I view Donald Trump as the Manchurian Candidate. For those who are listening who are old enough and remember the old movie, The Manchurian Candidate, basically it was someone that was sent in to really sabotage. And I think if you were looking for someone to sabotage the Republican Party, then Donald Trump was the person to do it. But I don't think that there was anyone out there that was that diabolical to come up with that idea. But that's pretty much where how I got to this point.
Well, I do want to talk a bit about politics because one of the things we've had Republicans, Democrats on the show, independents, and I mentioned in my initial monologue that it was imperative for me to have a wider perspective. And I'm wondering, from your vantage point, do you feel as though we as Blacks, because you mentioned that you felt the Democratic Party treated us as victims. So the question is, do we have a understanding of two-party or three-party or four-party politics? If we look at the Green Party being an independent, which is really no affiliation, the Democratic Party, we as a community of Blacks, do we really understand what you went to look at and studied, or what I went to look at to speak with you to make a determination that, hey, I'm supporting the man. The man's perspective aligns to mine. How do we need to discern this?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good point. And I've told people many times, and Mike, I may have said it when we first met, I chose to be a Republican. I'm not asking you all to join the Republican Party. I'm asking you to vote for me. It's just that simple. And I think, often in the Black community, um, we have voted, for one party. um, some of it was based on emotion. Some of it is based on, from say the late 1960s on, the policies of the Democratic Party. Um, but in many cases, not even listening to the other side. And so what happens is you have, particularly in this country, since we have mainly a two-party system, you have one party that says, and say the Republicans, who say, why should I listen to their issues? They're not going to vote for me anyway. Why should I go into that community? They're not going to vote for me anyway. And the other says, well, you're going to vote for me, so I don't have to come and talk to you. I don't have to really try to understand your
Wow.
issues. I
Wow.
can just do some ceremonial, feel good stuff here and there, but not really engage, not really invest the time and effort into the issues that are most important or that affect you on a day to day basis. So you know, we often get, and I say the royal we in terms of the Black community, kind of get left out when you see, other, communities, be it Asian Americans or the Latino community, the gay community, that making strides, and we still look at our community as, not quite, striding forward as quickly as some of these other communities are.
So, Lieutenant Governor, are you saying that as a strategy, our strategy is challenged because we have no leverage, because all of our eggs are in one basket? Do you think that's not a good strategy, and that's why many times we find ourselves on a treadmill economically and socially because we're all in one basket, so to say?
Yeah, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, but I think the way that and you don't have to change your party to make the party more responsive. You just have to make it from a standpoint that they recognize you're not going to vote for them if they don't deliver. One of the things, when Larry and I were campaigning, Larry Hogan was governor when I was lieutenant governor. For folks who don't follow Maryland politics, when we were campaigning, we were in West Baltimore, in Walbrook Junction area. And one of the things that I told a young lady while we were there, I said, if you vote for the same people, you basically are telling them that the conditions are okay. She was complaining about trash in the alleys, and a lot of it is local issues and not necessarily state issues. But I said, well, if you vote for the same folks, you're telling them it's okay. Everything's okay. And so it's not that you have to change parties per se. I mean, I think some of the elections, there are concerns that, or not concerns, but people are seeing that the Hispanic vote is up for grabs. They've made it competitive, that that the two parties have to compete for their votes. I think the Democrats still get a larger share, and probably a slight, well, not a slight, but a majority. But the Republican Party is getting a share of that, and so it means that both parties have to compete for it. But I'm just saying that if you vote for the people, vote for results, and listen to the other side. Listen, don't just knee jerk that, no, no, I'm not going to listen because one idiot or two idiots in the party said something. Um, you know, yeah, you will be in a situation where one party's not going to, take you seriously, and the other party is just going to take you for granted.
Well, it sounds like that word leverage again, Lieutenant Governor. And what I'd
Yeah.
like to do is transition. In 2015, you and former Governor Hogan won, right? 2015, you won, right? You won statewide office as Republicans, and I believe Bob Ehrlich at that time. And you're listening to 60 Minutes in Black America. We're talking to the former Lieutenant Governor of the state of Maryland. And as we said, whether you're in Alabama, California, Illinois, New York, Florida, although the politics may be slightly different as a strategy, as you're hearing for us as communities, comparing notes, comparing what this man has to say that is an American politician that's lived in Washington, D.C., that's lived in California, that's been a politician in the state of Maryland. Is this information that we can't use to revisit our strategies for the betterment, you know? But the question for you, Lieutenant Governor, is that you won in 2015 as a Republican ticket. And right off the bat, I believe, not too there much longer after that, you were immersed in urban issues around Freddie Gray, I believe, right? Can you talk about that for a minute?
Yeah, I think it was, maybe 2 months after we were sworn in 2015 that the whole situation with Freddie Gray, his death while in police custody, and the unrest that took place afterwards in Baltimore City was, like I said, about 2 months into our administration. So, we were new, still trying to develop a relationship with the leadership in Baltimore City, and clearly they were not prepared for what was taking place. And I personally feel that the leadership there kind of froze in that situation in terms of just not knowing or deciding on how to handle the situation.
But
And,
did they freeze, Lieutenant Governor? And sorry to interject. And for those of you that don't know, Freddie Gray was determined to be killed at the hands of Baltimore City police officer. And this was the initial issue around the country for the Breonna Taylors and the George Floyds and the others that were killed at the hands of police. It happened in Baltimore City, a city under now state rule, so to say, by Republican Party. So you said that they were unprepared, or were they unprepared well before that for this to happen? What do you think about that? Do you think that they were in a position to have avoided this, or was it something that was predictable based on the way the city was being run?
well, I'm saying not necessarily that they could have predicted, what ended up happening after, Freddie Gray died in custody of the police. I think the law enforcement and city leaders were not. They had not prepared the law enforcement operation to respond to the unrest that was occurring. That was, started off as basically kids, throwing rocks and kind of getting out of control. They were not. They didn't have the equipment that they needed to respond. They did not utilize, you know, appropriate crowd control methods, and the city leadership, the elected leadership, just did not, didn't take it. I think they took it seriously, and I don't want to put them down too far, but they weren't seeing the urgency in terms of needing to respond before it continued to spiral and get to the point where it was almost out of control. And so we had to step in, in terms of bringing in the National Guard. We had already put the National Guard on alert, because of, tensions. And the tensions in the city had started years before us. There was a prior mayor that was, doing street sweeps, just locking up people, sometimes sitting on the corners because he wanted to, show a tough on crime approach in the city.
And that was Martin O'Malley you're referring to, the former governor that ran for, former mayor, then turned governor, that ran for president in 2020, I believe. He's the one that you're referring to?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
And so there was a lot of
Democratic mayor as well, right? Can we?
Well, there hasn't been a Republican mayor in Baltimore City since 1960. So
Okay.
yes, absolutely. Um, so there was a lot of distrust that was going on, with the police department, and then what we saw in more recent years. There was a lot of corruption associated with what the police were doing, but they were, basically set loose on the community. So when Freddie Gray died in police custody, in under circumstances that were questionable at best, there was an eruption of violence and anger that occurred in the city. And we knew that there were going to be different services, there were going to be different protests, and so just as a precaution, we put the National Guard on alert the weekend before the funeral. And I believe the funeral was on that Sunday. There were a few minor incidents that the city could take care of, but then Monday, I believe, that's when the I guess riot, for lack of a better term, really started to unfold. And we brought in the National Guard as well as allied law enforcement agencies to help bring order back to the city. And we moved a lot of our personnel there. The governor then utilized the offices in Baltimore, and I was at the Maryland Emergency Management offices, making sure that we were coordinated and were able to bring some calm, to the city. And I think, and I want to just mention when the situation was happening in Minnesota, with some of the other, issues that came. You mentioned that Freddie Gray was the first of these. We didn't have the violence in Baltimore City. We didn't have, there were protests, a lot of protests going on, regarding Breonna Taylor and others, but we didn't have the violence then. And I think a message was sent, not that it was going to be put down, but I think the city realized, the people in Baltimore realized that they were not going to, let things get out of control in Baltimore again.
Wow. Lieutenant Governor, your administration, you and Larry Hogan's administration, I want to talk about it for a minute before I get into some specifics about your duties during the course of that 8 year period, particularly the first 4 year when the governor had to undergo some medical issues and you pretty much served as the governor of the state. But I want to talk about the popularity, which I believe your administration was the most popular with, since they were keeping stats on that of
Mhm.
over 70% in a deep blue state. What was the strategy behind your administration in either appeasing, or how did you rule a state that predominant Democratic? How did you do that? And then you got reelected again.
Right. Well, we focused on things that people were most affected by, what they were concerned about on a day-to-day basis, which, eh, what a lot of times the two parties will try to make all elections national, that whatever's going on in some, state, thousands of miles away, is part of a national argument. Whatever the talking heads in Washington or New York are talking about, or the folks on Capitol Hill are fussing about, that is the issue of the day. But you are much more affected on a day-to-day basis by what happens at the state and local level than you are on the federal level, unless you get drafted and shipped off to war. The it's the state and locals that repair the roads. It's the state and counties and local governments that manage and operate the school system. Criminal justice, from police to state highways to the highway patrol being our state troopers, to law enforcement, is at the local level. Prosecution and defense is at the local level. It's not a federal responsibility. And so we focused on those things that people were concerned about. We got elected because the taxes were too darn high, and they still are too high in this state. and the previous administration and the legislature, even the current legislature, doesn't quite understand that. And the public was sick and tired of it. And so they gave us a chance. And we were able to continue to focus on those kitchen table issues and try to bring common sense to Annapolis and to, to the state of Maryland. So, it was really, like I said, focusing on issues that were important to Marylanders, not getting caught up in, as I would say, the reindeer games that politicians like to play.
Well, you had mentioned one of the reasons that you were drawn to the Republican Party was because of the business aspects of it and the focus on business, and you seemingly feel as though a way out for Black communities is a focus economically on business. So the governor, Larry Hogan, unfortunately got very ill or had surgery during the course of, I believe, his your first term
He
in
was,
office.
he was
Right.
diagnosed with cancer.
He was
Yeah,
diagnosed with cancer.
non-Hodgkin's
And
lymphoma.
right, exactly. And fortunately, very fortunately, recovered from that. And you pretty much, I believe, ran the state, particularly at the Board of Public Works, which is the board that oversees fiduciarily the money that the state expends. What did you see in that position? How did you leverage being in that position as a Black man with a business astutement, understanding that there was an opportunity for Blacks who felt that that was never something that they gained from that board? Was there anything that you focused on being in that position during that time?
Well, I mean, um, the governor would allow me to do the Board of Public Works, not just during that time that he was getting treatment for cancer, but various times throughout our administration, because it is something that I was much more interested in. And because all the procurements over purchases that the state makes over $200,000 go through the Board of Public Works. All land transactions go through the Board of Public Works. Grants and loans go through the Board of Public Works and are approved. I wanted to make sure that small and minority businesses were getting a share of contracts, and I would challenge our agency heads with regard to what they're doing to make sure that businesses are getting opportunities. Be it woman-owned business, minority-owned business, or small businesses in general, were getting opportunities to compete for these contracts, and what steps they were taking. So, a lot of that, having that platform, I'd say, is really based on the relationship that the governor and I had going in. Um, we looked at it. He agreed that we'd be a partnership. Now, of course, he is the senior member, of that partnership, and he's kind of the CEO. And when we first were talking about, me joining the ticket and running, he told me, he said he looked at it that it would be a CEO and chief operating officer type of relationship because of my experience in government, both at the federal and the state level previously. And I'm much more of an operational person than, say, a politician or a policy person. That, being at the Board of Public Works is where you get into the operations of government. It's like, if follow the money. If you follow the money, you will understand what state government does. And I
Wow.
tell people, look at the Board of Public Works, and you will really get a good feel of what services the state of Maryland provides to its citizens.
Wow, that's powerful. You say follow the money, and following the money, you can make a determination as to the direction the state or any business is going in. So when you followed the money prior to being in office and saw where the money was going with unachieved goals of minority participation at the state level for Black businesses, What did you see as some of the reasons why, and were you able to accomplish in that regard anything during your 2 terms in office?
Well, one of the challenges with the state's MBE program, Minority Business Enterprise Program, is that it has primarily been looked upon as a subcontractor program. And that's come out of, it's managed by the Department of Transportation, and it's come out of the viewpoint that these are you know transportation, not just viewpoint, but I think the history was these were mostly transportation type of projects or large construction projects where subcontractors are going to be brought in, and there's a percentage in terms of subcontractors. I wanted to focus on how do we get these businesses as prime contractors. The difference on the sub and a prime is the prime gets paid first. So if the prime isn't getting paid for 30 days, that sub probably is not getting paid for 60 days. And sometimes there's a fuss about, their invoice. So they may not get paid for, 65, 70, 75 days. So I wanted to push a lot more towards prime contractors. Now, look, you can make a tremendous amount of money as a subcontractor. If you're the sub on the Joint Strike Fighter, that's a couple of $1 billion a year that you're getting, but that's still the big Raytheon type of companies and corporations. But we pushed a lot of what's called the Small Business Reserve Program, because see, at the state level, you cannot do set-aside programs. That was the Supreme Court struck those down several years ago, and you have to show that there's a disparity between the majority-owned companies and minority-owned companies to even justify the MBE program. But you can't really do it as a set-aside. It has to be goals-oriented. But you can set aside small business. If they're race neutral and gender neutral, you can set aside those. So I was saying, look, let's encourage minority businesses that meet the size standard, which if they were in the MBE program, for the most part, they would meet the size standard, to also bid in the Small Business Reserve Program. And so I would push also our agencies not only to meet their goals for the MBE, but also set aside contracts for small business, because they would then compete with other small businesses for those contracts, and not competing against the large, architectural firms or construction firms or accounting firms, but they were competing against those that are, comparable size.
Wow. Hey, Lieutenant Governor, we're going to come back. I got a couple more political questions, then I want to get into some fun stuff and your travels around the state and visiting all the state parks. But you're watching 60 Minutes in Black America. My name is Mike Haynie. We have the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland talking about state politics, and what better perch to get information for us as a people about party politics, about politics in general, than from someone that was actually in the game. Former attorney, business person, worked in various administrations in Washington, D.C., is talking about small businesses and procurement. We need to hear this. We need to understand it from a perspective that, is this part of our strategy? Talking about party politics to a point as to how do we measure Democrat, Republican, Independent, Green Party effectiveness for us as a people? Is it economically? Is it based on social issues and social programs only that we measure it? It's important that we hear a wider perspective. Hey, I want to talk for a second about next week's show, because we're very excited, very proud. We've always talked about the production team for this show, usually is our young people, Ramisha Gordon, Jasmine Pollock, Jeremiah Nixon. They're graduating next week from Warner University down in Florida. We're very, very proud of them. So Orrin will be leading them. Orrin Stewart will be leading them in conversation next week to talk about, with these Generation Xers, what their hopes and dreams are post graduation. We're just so proud of these three people. They've given their time and ensuring that this production is done well. And they're just great human beings. So, congratulations as they graduate next Saturday from Warner. And then next Sunday, they'll be featured on 60 Minutes in Black America so we can hear the younger perspective under Orrin Stewart. So, again, as I mentioned, we're talking to the Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, the former Lieutenant Governor of Maryland, Boyd Rutherford. Following Boyd, we'll have a update by Jamie Miner on cryptocurrency and the economic issues in the country and how crypto may be an option for some. And we actually invested dollars for those three graduates in cryptocurrency last year. And I got to tell you, not that they're going to be filthy rich, but I know it's been a positive game, and Jamie will talk about that. But let's bring Lieutenant Governor Rutherford back into the stream. And Lieutenant Governor, as I mentioned, I really want to get to some of the fun stuff you've done traveling the state, but just a couple more politic questions. And also, there's some questions in the chat that I hope to be able to get to. But we have transitioned from you and Larry Hogan's second term. And in your second term, if I recall correctly, was one in which Baltimore City, which is a stranglehold of the Democratic Party, I think you got upwards of 30%, 40% somewhere of the vote in Baltimore City as Republicans. What was it that Black community is seeing? Because two of the biggest Black communities in Baltimore, in the state of Maryland, are Prince George's County and Baltimore City. And your administration did extremely well in those two jurisdictions the second term.
Right.
Was it due to the fact that people were feeling the effects economically of your programs?
I think so. I think it was, you know, when you run for reelection, you're running on your record. And I think I know our performance was something that the majority of Marylanders, appreciated and supported. And the same for those in the African American community. They're Marylanders too. And they supported what we were doing and what we were trying to do. And they felt good about the direction that we were taking the state and our policies. And so, yes, in Baltimore City, we got a little more than 30%. I personally think it would have been higher. But for the fact that all the polls were showing that we were going to win by upwards of 20%. And I think it gave people an out to say, oh, I don't have to vote for a Republican and I can still get the guys that I want to be in Annapolis. And
Wow.
I heard people say that to me. They say, oh, well, you guys won anyway, kind of things. So they were happy we won, but they didn't have to go against their feelings that, oh, I'm being disloyal to the Democratic Party or something of that nature.
Right. Well, do you think that that was an opportunity for Blacks to finally discern open-mindedly a team or administration that was effective? Because that was during the course of the Donald Trump campaign, and as you
Yeah.
mentioned, that was an issue. But at least we weighed, at least it appeared our communities weighed the value of what it is that we had and what it was offering, meaning your administration. And is that a inroad to the future to begin to leverage what it is that we're able to get, regardless of what party comes into play? As you mentioned, Asians, the Jewish community, the Korean community, the Hispanic community, they're able to leverage because they look across multi-political platforms before they cast their votes. So I was encouraged.
So as long as both parties put forward good candidates, and candidates that folks can support. If we as Republicans nominate idiots, then it's going to be it becomes a challenge. But if they're competitive candidates that are being put forward, I think we showed that folks will give us an opportunity. I mean, even people who didn't vote for us now, of course, we're out of office, and so they kind of it's a free shot. They'll say to us, me, and I know the governor's gotten the same response that you guys did a really good job. I didn't vote for you, but guys did a really good job. And it's like, well, why didn't you vote for me? But that's another story.
Hey,
So,
let's switch real quickly to a national question for you. Ted Cruz, Tim Scott, Ron DeSantis, Donald Trump. Of those four names out there, what would you lean towards in terms of a presidential candidate from your party?
um, I like Tim Scott personally. I like his fellow South Carolinian Nikki Haley. I like governors. I think governors make good presidents, or have the ability to be good presidents because they've had executive responsibility. Um, so those two on the Republican side are Scott and Nikki Haley right now are people that I tend to like a little bit more.
Wow. Well, I appreciate that answer. So, in your state of Maryland, you elected the first black governor of the state of Maryland, only the third elected in the history of this country, Wes Moore, and you were head of the transition team. And I think we showed a picture of you and your predecessor or your
My
uh,
successor.
successor, Aruna Miller. And, it seemed to be a gracious relationship, etc. So, Wes Moore, what are your thoughts about Wes Moore? There you are, you and Wes Moore. You seem to be very gregarious and very comfortable.
Yeah, I mean, he's a good man. He loves his country. He loves Maryland. I mean, we're not going to agree on all policy issues. I think he means well, and so we'll see. We'll see how things go.
Great, great, great. Hey, well, I want to spin off now and talk about you visited over 70, was it 72, 73 state parks,
76.
76 state parks in Maryland. So I want to talk about that, and then maybe we can come back and get to a couple of questions if we've got some time later. But I believe you started this in 2019. Why did you decide to visit every state park in Maryland? What were you thinking regarding that?
Well, I read an article, I believe it was in the Washington Post, that the then governor, Terry McAuliffe of Virginia, said he was going to visit every state park. And I said, that's a good idea. Um, Maybe I should, do that. And I had already, gone to a couple of the state parks for various trips. I participated in the first what's called the first day hike, which is on January 1st, the morning of January 1st, you go to a park and you hike. So given that I'm not one of those revelers who parties all night on New Year's Eve, I like to go to bed at a reasonable time. Well, I will stay up till midnight, even though sometimes I don't want to on New Year's Eve. I do the first day hike, so I had been doing some of it, and then I decided I'm going to, take it up and hit all the parks. And so we
So
did it in 4 years.
you did it unbelievable in 4 years. So what was the highlight for you as you self-reflect on that? Was there something spiritual you got out of that? And if so, where was it? Was it overlooking? I think it was, what was it? The Monocacy River where you were at? Where was it that you felt like, wow?
Well, you said you did feel, you felt awe in a lot of locales around the state. Um, just the serenity of some of the locations, and particularly if you go kind of when the weather may not be as nice as sunny as say today, and you go on a day where it might be a little overcast, or it might be a little bit of rain or cold, and just how serene it is out in nature. And so and then someone is asking my favorite park. It's like picking your favorite child. I don't want to say I had a favorite park. But the park that made probably the greatest impact on me was Janes Island State Park, which is in just outside of Crisfield and Somerset County. And just when you go to the island, there's a mainland section, and then there's a little island that you can get to by canoe or kayak, or if you have a motorized boat, you can get there as well. And it just was so serene. I was there in late September, so it was a nice day, probably in the mid to upper 70s. And it was white sand beaches and no one on the beach. No one. You didn't even see footsteps for miles on the beach. And so it just was really, you're like, this is Maryland. You're in Maryland with this. And of course, I like the Western County or the Western parks, Garrett County and Allegheny County. Stayed in some cabins out there that are really nice. I mean, they're not roughing it. When you have regular bathrooms and baseboard heat and a full refrigerator, stove, microwaves, that's not roughing it. That is not roughing it. I don't even call that camping. You're just staying in, an apartment, but it's a cabin. So no, it's and the diversity of our parks is something that I was not familiar with, and it brought trying to bring more attention to the parks, and we were able to do that even before COVID. And when COVID hit and people were shut in, they rediscovered or tried to discover our parks and go out to the parks. Many of them that are much closer to our population centers in the Baltimore-Washington corridor would fill up, but even some of our Western and Eastern Shore parks as well.
They have a plaque at Wood Park that is in recognition of your park visits. What park is that they placed that plaque?
Rosaryville State Park, which is in southern Prince George's County. The department and the governor surprised me by naming a section of the park. It's about 180 acres or more of parkland that was purchased. Well, the additional property, which is now the Rutherford area named after me, was purchased a couple of years ago. It was a farm, a working farm, and it was added to the existing Rosaryville State Park, which is about 1,000 acres in southern Prince George's County. And as a matter of fact, I was just there yesterday planting a tree in that section for Earth Day and planting the tree in memory of my father.
Wow. Well, congratulations to you, Lieutenant Governor. And hey, a couple of questions before we transition out of here. And I so much appreciate your transparency in being here and speaking to our viewers. So a couple of questions came up. Why did not you run for governor of the state of Maryland?
Um, well, I was going to give a very simple answer, and I'll get to that simple answer, but I didn't go into being lieutenant governor with the thought of becoming governor. I had not even thought about running for office until Larry Hogan, came to me. And Larry Hogan was a friend of mine before we ran for office. Our families entertained with each other. Unbeknownst to us, he and Yumi's middle daughter went to high school with my son, my wife, and my son. So we developed a friendship over many years previous to this time. So I wasn't thinking of that. In most cases, the lieutenant governor comes in, they're a fellow politician. All the lieutenant governors of memory, there've only been 10, have been, politicians. They've held office somewhere else. That's one. Two, my wife was adamantly opposed to the idea. And I'd rather be married than be governor. And three, I didn't really want it. I didn't really want it. And you'd have to want it. And particularly at this point in my life, I did not want it. Maybe 5, 10 years ago, maybe I would have really considered it, more like 10 years ago. But at this point in my life, that's not what I wanted. And so I was willing to walk away from it.
So are you saying that we will not see you in another elected office in the future?
You should never say never, but I do not plan on it. I hope not. I don't, no, I don't. I do not. I don't plan it. What did Lyndon Johnson said? I will not run. If nominated, I will not accept. That's when he said he wasn't going to run for president again after serving basically one and a half terms that
So,
Johnson did. So
so
no,
what's in the
I'm
card?
more like Cincinnatus, walking away. I came out of, you know, came in to do a job, did the job, did the best I could. I always said I wanted to be the best lieutenant governor I could be, and then walk away from it.
Well, no doubt about it, you were the best. If some people may say one of the best, I say you're the best, and there's some very measurable data out there that proves that I know I'm aware of, and other people do as well. So, what's in the cards for you for the future, Lieutenant Governor? I know you're working for a law firm now,
Yeah. Well,
um,
I'm a
and
yeah.
and you're
Yeah.
an author. You're an author. You're a book writer. Where can people get that book? I've got a couple
Well,
copies. Where can people get a copy of that book?
well, we have to see about some additional production of the my journal, and I did I did keep a prop, which is the Rutherford Travels. Essentially, it's a journal of the parks that I hit, and so it's my comments, my observations, in some cases, a little history of the parks that I visited. Um, we have to look in terms of whether we're going to have additional production because these were just producing or printing. And so my firm, the law firm that I now am a partner with, Davis, Agnor, Rappaport, and Scalney, is in Columbia, Maryland. And so I'm practicing law, back to practicing law there in the firm, mostly in government contracts and, right now, local government relations. I'm precluded for a year, not quite a year now, but a year from any government relations on the state legislative side. So, but I have a couple of clients that I'm working with that have local government issues as well as
Wow.
just legal practice.
Hey, well, listen, I promise just one last question because
Yeah.
I could talk to you forever, man. This is just such a good conversation. And as I mentioned, it's just so important for us as a community to hear from you, a different perspective. You're just like us. There's nothing that I have heard or seen or spoken with you ever about that made me feel as though you were any different than anyone else because you were labeled a Republican or Democrat. It's irrelevant. It's
Mhm.
irrelevant. But final question for you. In 8 years, what was your biggest joy, biggest enjoyment, biggest takeaway being lieutenant governor?
I'd say, the amount of people that I met, along the
How many did
way.
you meet, you think? A
What's that?
million? How many did you meet? How many
Oh, I
hands did
don't
you shake?
know. I don't know. I run into people who, they say, "Oh, we met before. We met at such and such and such and such," and I'm like, I have no memory of that. But I guess I was being nice, and but you meet a lot of nice people along the way. Even folks who you may disagree with on policy matters. You can find some places, some common ground in places where you can agree. But I think it's the various state employees that worked with, not just who were administration or came in with our administration, but career people who, are working hard every day to do the best they can for the Maryland citizens. And then just, citizens in general. Didn't matter if it was, while walking in a parade or visiting one of the small municipalities around or in Baltimore, or down in Prince George's or Charles County. It just meeting people all over. So that's probably the one thing that I could point to that I enjoyed.
Well, Lieutenant Governor, I really appreciate you being on 60 Minutes in Black America. It's been a pleasure speaking with you. I'd love for you to come back on in a bit because I'm sure there are some things that are going to be happening with you in the private sector. But thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you. Thank you.
Hey, you're watching 60 Minutes in Black America. My name is Mike Haynie. Just a wonderful conversation chat with our former Lieutenant Governor, Boyd Rutherford, a outstanding human being in addition to being an American politician. Hey, I'd like to bring Jamie Miner in. We've got a few minutes left. We want to talk about crypto for a bit because we talked about economic issues in the country. We talked about the banking crisis earlier with Jamie. So, Jamie, hey, update us first of all on the market in crypto because I know it's starting to close in a bit. We thought that there were some issues. And I know the portfolio that we invested for our young people is beginning, if I use the word correctly, to explode. So, Jamie, it's all yours. Update us on crypto, man, in the current economic conditions.
Hey, Mike, I appreciate you, man. It's been good to be back on. The mentorship's been great. We introduced Bitcoin at 17.7, I think was around the range. It's had a good run up to 30,000. We took your investment of about $100, and so far, it's got about a 40% return on the investment. But overall, we're the real goals for investing, we're trying to show is you just need really two things. It's just to invest in early into good companies, and then just have some patience and wait. So we're hoping that we can turn that $100 into about $2,500 over the course of time.
So Jamie, the Bitcoin market apparently is closing in. There's not much coin out there, from what I understand, to purchase. Is that?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, people say there's 21 million Bitcoin, and that's a fixed amount, which is one of the features that makes Bitcoin very appealing. But when you dig a little bit deeper, there's already about between what people have bought and what can't be recovered anymore. There's already about 92% of the total supply that's no longer available. So that means only 8% of the total amount in existence that's going to be available to purchase. So, I wanted to bring that up because I think it's misleading to think that there's 21 million of these that you can buy. It's really not. Most people are not selling these. They're holding on to them because they see what's happening in the economy and how difficult the banking crisis has become and what's happening in the financial market across with the recession. So Bitcoin is a area where people can go to that can help them have a different type of financial security that offsets some of the banking concerns that people are having in the country.
Hey, so before you guys go and walk away from Jamie right now, it doesn't make a difference whether you're like me and don't fully understand the economic issues and inflationary issues and a recession pending. They're predicting a recession by the third quarter in the United States of America. And the hedge against inflation and recession to dollars has been Bitcoin now, or has been cryptocurrency. Let me clarify that. And so much that we understand the United States government has bought a significant amount of cryptocurrency to hedge itself against the inflation of the dollar. So whether you understand it or not, whether you sign out or not, if you go into, Jamie can tell us a couple of platforms, purchase as much crypto as you can. And Jamie, you break down for us that 40% that our investment in these young people's portfolio has increased by so that people can understand the correlation. You don't have to understand the game, just understand it to the point that this is where you need to be playing if you've got money versus putting your money in a bank that gives you a less than 0.5% interest annually on your dollar, meaning a nickel, if you have a dollar, is what they're really 2.5 cents annually for your dollar. So Jamie, break it down for us in terms of how did the portfolio for these young people appreciate like that?
So basically, the difference between the crypto market and the traditional money system is that the government, they print more money, and more money devalues the value of the dollars that we own. In cryptocurrency, they understand that scarcity is what drives price and value. And so we're 1 year from now, Bitcoin is going to reduce the scarcity of how many Bitcoins will be rewarded for those who basically the Bitcoin network, just breaking it down very simply, it's just like a bank. It's transactions to and from people, and people in that network can validate that those transactions are real. And that's it. And they get rewarded for Bitcoin for participating in validating that those transactions are real. That's all it is. It eliminates the banking system, and every transaction is recorded. And if you participate in validating those transactions, you get rewarded Bitcoin. That's the only way that supply comes into the market. So again, the US dollar is printed that devalues the worth of every penny that we get. In cryptocurrency, they reduce the supply, which increases the value of every coin that we get. So that's really the biggest difference in it. And we're 1 year away from the big event where Bitcoin is going to reduce its supply in half. And so right now it's very crucial that every dollar we can get, and I'm doing it myself, I'm sacrificing, not go that $50 dinner or something that I could buy, that could be the difference of, like it could be $5,000 return on a $50 dinner. That's how much you can gain from this time right now over the course of a year. If you just invest small amounts, $50 every week, $25 every week, it really can add up to a large amount. I just got off of a Zoom before this show, Mike, and I helped design a portfolio of $5,000 in crypto that we're hoping to get over $150,000 return. Again, it doesn't take much money to get in. It just takes time and patience and getting your money into something that grows as opposed to spending money like we're accustomed to because we deserve it, because we work hard every week, because we don't have a lot. But if we're just patient, we can really have a lot much more.
Wow. Hey, Jamie, so could you give people, what he's talking about is supply and demand. Just like when they shut down oil over in the Mideast, what happens when we don't have an oil pipeline over here? They raise the price of gas at the pump. We pay more. What he's saying to us is that instead of printing more or making more Bitcoin, the government does it all the time. They just print cash that has no value to it. Just print cash, 2 trillion, 1 trillion, they print it. What he's saying is that Bitcoin, as an example, is going to lessen its market to raise its value. Okay? It's irrelevant whether we understand it or not, but as a hedge against inflation and a recession in which the dollar value will go downward, Jamie is saying to us, we need to get into cryptocurrency, and Bitcoin is the pathway, as well as what other coins out there, Jamie, would you recommend?
Well, here's the thing. So it goes in stages. So Bitcoin starts it and is the foundation of what the holds the value of cryptocurrency. It has about 40 or 50% of all the cryptocurrencies in its market share. Okay, but now this is really key. So when I'm watching the market, how it transitions is, that when people are pulling money out of the market, that's a bad time. But right now, the Bitcoin price may come down a little bit over the next few months, and that's okay. But what we're noticing is that the total value of the crypto market is not going down. So that means this is one of the things my mentor taught me is you do what billionaires do. Where the money's flowing, that's where you want to go. I don't have billions, but I hope to aspire to have more than I have. So what we got to do is model ourselves after the people that have the money and what they're doing. What they're doing is they're taking their money from Bitcoin and they're going to other altcoins, alternative coins like Ethereum, which we introduced into the show earlier to the mentors. There's also another coin that's being launched. I've introduced it to the mentor group. I've helped them position themselves to get some free tokens as a result. But it's Pulse Chain, which is an Ethereum improvement. So that's another one that's supposed to be launching soon. We've been a little frustrated with its delays of the launch, but it's another opportunity for to model after an existing platform, existing project, existing cryptocurrency that's done really well, but it has some improvements. So we look to find some problems in the market. Here's a company that solves those problems, and that's usually that company will then gain some market share. So that's a couple of things that are on the horizon that I'm looking at. But right now, getting your money into the market, into any of the coins, really, I mean, right now it's been so low that it can only go up from here. And right now, with the supply reduction that's anticipating, it's really the time in the cycle where we're expecting a big explosion.
Hey, Jamie, final question for you. For people that want to invest today or looking to invest, whether they understand it or not, but take that $50 instead of going and buying dinner, but take it and buy it in Bitcoin and just take a chance. And any of you out there that do this, just go take a chance and buy it. What platforms are out there? Robinhood? Are there other platforms out there that they can buy this Bitcoin or this cryptocurrency on that you can tell us about quickly?
The safest one is Coinbase. And the reason I say that,
very familiar with that.
The reason I say that is because it's a publicly traded US-based company. It's highly regulated. A lot of the coins that you can access on there, are great projects, good founders, been established, they've been vetted well. So I feel really comfortable. It's 100% reserves, meaning unlike the banking system, your money cannot be touched. Whatever you put in there will stay in there. So that's the one that I would say to sign up for and then to get involved in it. Any coins that are on there are well vetted crypto projects that I feel confident that you'd have some really good success with.
Hey, Jamie, thank you much. We'll see you back in 2 weeks as you give us another update on where we're going. You're watching 60 Minutes in Black America. My name is Mike Haynie. Today, as we've talked to our Lieutenant Governor from the state of Maryland about American politics, we've just talked to Jamie, and there's a correlation between what both of them said. Lieutenant Governor said, follow the money, and that's where you'll start to see policy. We also talked about the fact of being open-minded as a people and looking at other means and other ways to do things. Well, Jamie was saying the same thing. Hey, versus looking at the dollar, the cash dollar that is devaluing itself, understand crypto, understand Bitcoin. That's why we've had this on the platform for the past 6 or 7 months. There is something to it. There is something happening, but only when we begin to get into areas that we may not be as knowledgeable about, do we begin to see change, and do we begin to expect that we will get a return before it is taken off. So let's get ahead of a curve for a change, and let's look at cryptocurrency. Let's look at party politics on a broader perspective than just the narrow-minded aspect that we do. And I'm not sitting here saying or encouraging for any particular party, but we know as a people we only have leverage. We only have leverage when we know that someone is going to go somewhere else versus staying with us all the time. Hey, look forward to seeing you next week on 60 Minutes in Black America. Thank you so much for watching. Have a great week.